Mr. Glass. Hello, everybody. Hello, good evening. Isn't it great to be in this valley together? I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be amongst friends, to see faces that we've gotten to know, people I admire, writers I admire. I kind of wish that we had been under the stars as we were doing this reading, but you know, this is what it is. So maybe tomorrow night we'll be under the stars. My name is Julia Flynn Seiler. People here call me Julie, and I'll be kicking off tonight's look at Research as Revelation, which is going to be a conversation about how unexpected discoveries and creative research techniques can transform a story, fiction or nonfiction, into a compelling narrative. I'm especially delighted to be here with four writers who I've known and followed for many years, and who continue to inspire me. They'll each read a piece of writing. They may discuss it a little bit. And then after their readings, we'll have a conversation, and there'll be some opportunity for Q&A as well. And I'll be repeating the questions that you ask. Anyways, we have just an amazing lineup of people, and in my case, friends who are here as readers. So we're going to do this by alphabetical order by first name. So we're going to start, kind of a weird way to do it, but I know, really weird. We're going to do it with the amazing Hector Tobar as our first reader. Woohoo. He's a Guggenheim Fellow and is a Los Angeles-based author of 7 books, including the novels The Barbarian Nurseries and The Last Great Road Bum, and also the nonfiction book Deep Down Dark, which was a New York Times bestseller. Some of you may have seen the movie that was made of his amazing book, Deep Down Dark. He's also a former journalist who has hidden little pieces of himself in all his books. Here's Hector.
Thank you, Julie, for that introduction. Thank you also to Brett and Lisa and the teams of people that make this event possible, and it's such an honor to be invited back to the place where my literary career accidentally began. You can ask me about that on the side. And speaking of a literary career, I want to read to you from my 7th book, My Beloved, My Metropolis, a novel, which, if I finish the revisions by July 31st, will come out in September of 2027, my publisher and editor tell me. So, clock's running. So this novel is an attempt to deal with what Los Angeles has become. Many of us, remember Los Angeles as the movie capital, entertainment capital of the world. And of course, today, LA is known around the world as a capital of homelessness, unfortunately, my hometown. And so My Beloved, My Metropolis is a novel that unfolds across 500 years of Los Angeles history, beginning 500 years in the future and working its way back to 2025 and the events of 2025 in Los Angeles. And so because it deals with such a depressing subject, it is a love story, which is the only way I bring myself to read it. So it's about 2 lovers who are resurrected 3 times as they fall backwards in history. And the first time they are teenagers, 2 women in love in Los Angeles, 500 years in the future in the post-apocalyptic Los Angeles. Then they're resurrected as parents. And each time they're resurrected, they're older and further along in their relationship. They're parents of indeterminate gender, with a wife and that my protagonist has a wife and son. And then finally, in the last section, set in 2025, the protagonist is a Latino male college professor, which is something that I think I have some authority about. So in the final section, it's very much inspired by Ulysses, by Joyce's Ulysses. And so this college professor is going to live an ordinary day. And so, like Joyce was a kind of inveterate researcher. He researched all of his books. He researched the stories in Dubliners. He researched Ulysses, the way people researched in the 1920s and 30s, which is he wrote letters to people. He looked up things in old directories to make sure that he got certain details right. So I've researched this novel of 2025. It takes place on a November 14th, a Friday, November 14th, 2025. And so, as in Ulysses, I have a protagonist who is pining for his beloved. Now, my protagonist has lost his beloved. In Ulysses, Leopold Bloom knows that his beloved is being unfaithful to him, right, on that day. And so it's just a normal day in Los Angeles where this college professor, he's hoping to be reunited with his beloved. And so he goes to a funeral, which is based on an actual funeral that I went to of my comadre's father, a man who died at the age of 92. And when I went to this funeral, I thought, this is a novel. And I took copious notes after I left the funeral, which is a kind of weird thing to do when you're at a funeral, to take notes. And of course, I lost them. When I went back to write the novel a couple years later, I could not find my notes. So I relied on my memory and also my research skills, and I found the obituary to the man who died that day. And so I want to read to you first, this is about research, just a few lines from the obituary of Miguel Z. Cabildo. Miguel Z. Cabildo, 92, passed away on November 4th at his home in City Terrace. He was the husband of Petra E. de Cabildo. He proposed to her the day he met her. They were married for over 53 years. Born in Orizaba, Veracruz, on October 6, 1923, he became a master tailor in Mexico City. He came to the U.S. in 1954. He found work as a master tailor in Beverly Hills, where he worked for Harry Cherry during the 1950s and 60s, and made tailored clothes for Hollywood stars, including Walter Matthau, Jack Cassidy, and Yul Brynner. Personal hero of mine because he's bald. He later worked at Saks Fifth Avenue and other fine clothiers. In addition to his full-time work, he often took an extra work at his tailor shop at home to help make ends meet and put his children through college. So that's a little bit of the research. And here's a passage inspired in part from that research and in part by my memories of going to this funeral. And remember, my protagonist is waiting to be reunited with his beloved there. They're an estranged couple. I'm like a teenager waiting for his date to appear, wondering if she will appear. A mural on the wall above the pulpit, a shepherd guiding his flock, the puffy sheep, the slender lamb. Just before the altar, there was a board on a stand. Pictures of Don Miguel, very dapper. He was a tailor in a shop that catered to Hollywood stars, made suits for Walter Matthau, and Yul Brynner, the handsomest bald man of his age, played Ramses the Pharaoh in the Ten Commandments. I close my eyes and imagine Don Miguel in that dapper and formal era. He stretches his measuring tape around the waists of the stars, asking them to extend their arms like wings. The scent of wool, Los Angeles as it was, ice clinking in glasses with bourbon, crowding into the theaters to smoke and see Yul Brynner in Egyptian costume on his throne. So let it be written, so let it be done. Don Miguel's daily drive across the segregated city, back home here to the east side, everyone in their place, smoggier, newer, the freeway that ran past my childhood apartment building in Hollywood. So a little bit of, research. Thank you. I'm sorry, and I'm a teacher, so I think the point of that for me pedagogically, in this moment, pedagogically, is that as you'll see from all of us, the research serves as a kind of stimulus to the imagination, right, to enter into a moment. So that's both me having lived this moment, having researched it, and then being this protagonist inside of that moment who has these memories, who's longing for his beloved. So, do a little bit of a spoiler and tell you that he is not reunited with his beloved in that day, on his Bloom's Day in 2025 in Los Angeles, my protagonist, who's unnamed. And like Leopold Bloom, he's kind of depressed about it. that he's not going to be reunited with his beloved. And so he continues with his day. And he also is someone who's the story is about time travel. So he is having these moments where he sees times going backward, right? And I did some research on this, and I discovered that there is actually an illness where people see things go backwards, and it's called Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Bing, right? So in this section, he is in the depths of his depression. He's going to Pershing Square, in the center of LA in twilight. The other thing that I'll throw in as the research thing is that I went to Pershing Square because I used to be a reporter for a newspaper, so you go to the place to see it. So I went to Pershing Square at twilight. I saw a homeless person pushing an empty wheelchair. It was the strangest thing. And so that inspired it. Also, this is based in part, there's some details that were in a column that I wrote for the LA Times in 2010, where I just described life one night on the square. So remember my protagonist, he's depressed and he's thinking about Alice in Wonderland. There's a bounce to my gait, and at 4th and Spring, I stop and light the joint again. Here, take a toke, Alice. I hold out the burning doobie for my companion, and a woman at a bus stop looks at me quizzically. I know, lady, I know. I'm a middle-aged professor contributing to the delinquency of a mythical minor. Arrest me! One more toke and off we go, Alice and I, down 4th toward the park. Also, there are hallucinations in Ulysses. I haven't got to that part of the book yet, but Wikipedia tells me that they're there. The sidewalks are especially crowded Friday afternoon, everyone getting ready to let their hair down. A desultory, exhausted group of commuters moves towards the great mouth of the metro station. A couple of unhoused philosophers occupy a spot by the stairs, passing the time. And now a man with intense brown eyes rolls by with an empty wheelchair. He circles around with his invisible passenger, seemingly unsure whether he should go down the stairs or down the escalator. And then he turns away from the station altogether, and he takes his invisible passenger elsewhere. Who's he got in there? Do you know, Alice? She doesn't answer. Poor thing, a little put off by the scene here at the Metro, are we? Let's cross the street into the park. Pershing Square. This used to be the Central Park of Los Angeles, Alice. Just run in front of the bus like this. Don't worry about the traffic signal. Stately palm trees greet us. My beloved and I standing here back in the day. The park's street lamps have come on, but they don't seem to be illuminating anything right now. In this, l'heure bleue, as the French call it. They're just little spears floating above the heads of an innocent British girl and me, the stray dog, leading her into his wonderland. Somewhere in the stratosphere, the Queen of Hearts is watching us with her drones, waiting to cut off our misbehaving heads. The 21st century. It's all a dream to you, Alice, isn't it? There's a doughboy over there, that statue. Let's take a moment to just stand here in this space, surrounded by these buildings. Taller than anything in the London of your day, so imposing their mass, their ambition, the geometries they bring into the world. Look, over there! I pointed to a building of brown stone, shorter than all the others, but imposing nonetheless. See those green vines spilling over the edge? That little garden of Babylon up there, 15 floors up, the squat trees growing on the roof. That's a little garden of Babylon up there, 15 floors up. That's where the well-off people of Los Angeles are right now, enjoying a Friday night, festive little Christmas lights all around them, sipping mixed drinks with names coined by poet mixologists. We stood there, Alice and I, admiring the wealth of the 21st century and of all the centuries represented in the city square and the buildings around us. I watched the color change in the sky because now, after my 3rd or 4th toke, and with the magic of a mushroom microdose flowing through my blood, the blue in the sky was decomposing into purple. We walked to a corner of the park with a short run of steps. There were two men with skateboards, both in their 30s, at play on a Friday at twilight. "Ollie up, 180, half cab off," one of them announced. And then he mounted his deck, which was bejeweled with images. There was music in the friction of the skateboard wheels gripping and launching from the concrete. He flew through the blue hour, on and off the stairs, making circles and curves with his bent knees and arms, climbing and bouncing back on the ground, balanced. So thank you. That's my novel. Thank you.
Okay, wow. Hector, thank you. Our next reader is Jean Carstensen, and her first book is A Greek Tragedy, One Day, a Deadly Shipwreck, and the Human Cost of the Refugee Crisis. It was named the 2026 California Book Prize Silver Medal winner in nonfiction. It was a finalist for both the Penn Galbraith Award for nonfiction and the Los Angeles Times Book Awards. A pretty great debut. As a reporter in Greece and Turkey during the 2015 Syrian refugee crisis, Jean was frequently served tea by refugees who maintain their dignity in difficult situations by offering hospitality to the stranger. And here's Jean.
Wow, this is really exciting. Thank you, Julie, and to everybody, community of writers, for a little closer. I was wondering, that pop I was hearing, that was not from Hector being too close, I guess. Yes, so my book, A Greek Tragedy, is based on my reporting when I was over in Greece and Turkey in 2015, when around 1 million Syrian and Afghan and other refugees were crossing from Turkey to Greece. And I was in the middle of this as a reporter, and it really had an impact on me. And it was very emotional and moving to see so many people on the move and taking their lives into their own hands to cross what was only a 5 to 6 mile crossing, but could be really deadly dangerous. And on October 28th, 2015, a horrible shipwreck occurred. And it was a wooden boat. Most of the boats coming at the time, you may have remembered, were rubber rafts. And there were many shipwrecks happening and terrible deaths. But this was magnitudes larger. And the smugglers would charge more for people who wanted to come on these wooden boats, claiming that they were safer, but they actually were not. So that's just a little basic background. About 4 years later, in 2018-19, I decided I wanted to write a book and focused on this shipwreck. And what I'm going to read to you now is just a few excerpts from the section in the middle of the book. You've already met some of the people on the boat, 2 Afghans and 2 Syrians, and you've also met some of the rescuers and local Greeks. So you kind of have a sense of this cast of characters and the background of this crisis and on the island. And now you're getting down to the shipwreck itself. And I wanted to share this part, I mean, in part because it is quite dramatic, but also because I worked really hard to be able to have the reader feel that you were out there on the water with these people. And it took an incredible amount of research for me to achieve this. There was plenty of TV footage from that day and documentaries and investigations, but no personal stories really had been told about what happened. And also, it's a horrible thing. The boat sunk so quickly that nobody really knew what it looked like. Some people were watching it with binoculars from the Greek side because there were many volunteers and NGOs on the island. And you have to remember, thousands of people were arriving every day. So I'm just telling you about one incident, but it was the worst incident in a season of terrible incidents. And I'll just briefly say that the hardest part of the research for me was finding survivors from this particular incident. Just that day, 7,000 people arrived to that single island. So I didn't start going back until 4 years later. Where are these people? You have no idea. They could be anywhere in the world. Likely, most people were wanting to get to Europe, so you could guess. Maybe there were survivors in Germany, but I really had no way of knowing. And we can talk about that later. The other thing I would just say that's very interesting is the last refugee who I did find, a woman named Amel from Syria. I found her because she was doing her own storytelling about this incident. And she had a wrist camera on when this terrible thing happened. Her boyfriend's a filmmaker in Germany. They're both creative types. She was a frustrated artist, didn't want to be a journalist, which is what she had studied. And so without knowing it, because she forgot about the camera, she ended up documenting this entire incident when she's in the water. And this was in addition to all of the media footage that I could see. I eventually went to Germany and met her, and she showed me all this footage, and it gave me a level of detail that I never would have had. Plus, it gave me the confidence because she told me her story as we watched this footage. And I had many experiences talking to people over and over and over again, very simple sentences in a book like this, very direct. For me to have the confidence to write them in nonfiction, there are hours and hours and hours behind of comparing what people said, looking at footage, and bringing things together. So this is from chapter 17 and chapter 19, and it's multiple points of view, mostly refugees who are on this boat, and then you'll meet one Spanish lifeguard at the end who arrived on a jet ski. From the upper deck, everything seemed fine at first. Amel sat on the right, holding on to the metal railing. Malik was next to her, texting their location to the WhatsApp group. The sea was smooth as the boat left the port. It was so sunny, Malik didn't even bother to put on his coat. They noticed that 2 other boats left the same time that they did and were motoring alongside. Were they smugglers? The Turkish Coast Guard. They'd heard stories about the Coast Guard knifing rubber boats or setting them adrift. It made them nervous, but they tried to put their fears out of their mind. Malik texted their friends, "We're fine." Down below on the main deck were Hedayat and Zora huddled with the boys in the back corner. Waves thudded against the side of the hull. Hedayat craned his neck over the side. He saw a green mountain in the distance, the Greek island where they were headed, he assumed. It didn't look too far. His heart pounding with worry, he told himself they would arrive soon. Okba heard cracking noises coming from the center of the boat. Up above, dozens of people dangled from the stairs and clung to the metal railing. As the boat pitched sharply from side to side in the waves, the entire upper story began to rock. Unable to move because of his sprained ankle, he watched as several men jumped up and leaned their backs and shoulders into the posts to try to keep them from buckling. The structure groaned and splintered as the boat leaned precariously to the right. Usman and Abukar stared at their parents without uttering a sound. Wood popped, passengers howled, the wind roared. But the boys kept a terrible silence, Hedayat recalled. He yearned to comfort them, to say, "Don't worry, my sons, Petterjohn will protect you." But Petterjohn did not know what to do. Oh God, how can I save my family? Amal and Malik held on to the metal railing as the boat tilted down to the right. Malik texted their GPS location to the WhatsApp group. Then the upper story gave way, collapsing onto the lower deck. People screamed as the tonnage mangled the bodies of people down below. The next thing Amal knew, she was in the water, gasping for breath. She half floated, half sat next to Malik on a big piece of white wood with maybe 30 other people. She realized the wood was the floor of the second story, where they had just been sitting before the boat collapsed. They had landed on top, but others were probably dead underneath. Gerard pulled back on the throttle, stood up on the jet ski, and shoved his steamy, salt-encrusted goggles onto his forehead. "What hell is this?" he said to Danny, who was riding shotgun. Gerard gaped as hundreds of people, some wearing life jackets, some not, flailed in the water, calling out for help. In one direction, 20 or 30 people rode on top of a piece of the wrecked upper story like a raft. Clumps of people clung to the scraps of wood, inner tubes, luggage, or each other. Others floated alone or holding a child. Desperate faces disappeared under the waves, then sputtered to the surface again. Screams and prayers threaded through the roaring wind. Gerard scanned the scene for life rafts. As a lifeguard, he knew that the first thing you do in a situation like this is throw out everything that floats. Give them something to hold on to, then start rescuing. But neither Frontex nor the Hellenic Coast Guard had thrown out any flotation devices. What the fuck? And I will end there.
Thank you so much, Jean. That was very powerful. Josh Wheel is the author of the novels What Came West and The Great Glass Sea, the novella collection The New Valley, and the story collection The Age of Perpetual Light. A Fulbright Fellow and National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. His awards include the American Academy of Arts and Letters First Fiction Prize, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and the California Book Award. He writes in an old 1959 camper trailer down on a creek, biking out to it each dawn, geared up against mountain lion and bear. Here's Josh.
Thanks, Julie. And Jean, I would say thank you, but now I have to follow that, so Jesus. But that was really powerful. I am not a journalist, and I've never been a journalist, so I'm going to hide behind my fiction. I make stuff up, but my research is a big part of that. So I'm just going to read from What Came West, from my new novel. And it's a historical adventure novel set in the wilds of the Sierra Nevada in the years before the California Gold Rush. And it's basically about a man, Silas, who doesn't fit into the society that he lives in and can't really abide living in it in the East, and moves farther and farther west, seeking a world that he can live in without conflict and without rubbing up against it in violent ways, and finds a corner of the Sierras that allows him to do that, only to have it ripped away from him when the gold rush hits. So he is, for most of the book, he's writing a letter to his son that he abandoned when he was 3, when his son was 3. It's written on the back of illustrations he does that's kind of like a field notes to his world. And I'll just read the beginning of that letter. I would kind of maybe listen in here, for there are 3 elements of research that were really important to the book. One was I found myself having to go very deeply into the world of the Nisenan and the Native Americans who lived in the area, and that affected the story dramatically. And then also the environmental destruction that was going on in the 1800s, which I hadn't really been aware of, that made a huge impact in the book. And finally, neurodivergence, which became something that I focused more and more intensely on as I got to know Silas as a character. So here he is. You will want to know why, even if you do not think so, even if you have tried to cut loose from me and done it. Still, one day you will want to, I know, because I have tried to cut loose too from you, your mother. She used to call you Shosh. We used to. Yes, cut loose and done it, and still I am here 12 years later in these last hours I will have in this place that has become my reason why for everything, for all of it has become me, your father. And still, here I am now writing to you. It is Tsemsampauto, season of small trees freezing, October 49, maybe November. Cold outside enough to snow, but in here warm with the fire and smoke, and so they will find me. Outside I have set the traps, 20-some spring-loaded spiked steel jaws waiting in the woods round me for whoever comes. The Nisanons say when you die your heart stays a few days longer, goes round to all the spots you knew in life, now as your ghost, to do again all of the things you did before you died. I have been thinking on it. Is it for the spirit or for the living who are left? The living do not know the ghost is there, and if they did, they could not see it. The spirit knows the living are near, but cannot allow itself to see them either. If it so much as looks at someone, the one who it lays eyes on will die too. So it has got to redo its life all over in a kind of blindness of its own making, a kind of dance, reenacting memories alongside those who also lived them, but now alone. Here's what I think. I think it is for both, to give time to the living and the dead, to let them, make them, force them to feel. I think that is why they cannot see each other, so they will look into themselves instead and grieve. Maybe then when the heart at last goes west to rise off of the earth, it can leave behind its regret, its sorrow, which would make this that I'm writing now really for myself. Except if somehow I can get it to you. Then I will have got round the rules, let you see me. Your father, back when I was a boy of 3 or 4, bent low and moving slowly through shadows of branches and leaves, my earliest memory. An afternoon, it must have been 08 or 09, my mother, brother, sister, the 4 of us, gathering walnuts in the grove just outside town, when from somewhere beyond the trees there came a murmur, low, like a breeze in the canopy, but rising too suddenly, building too steadily, already become too loud. I was crouched down filling my sack, lost in the rhythm of reaching for each windfall nut, each hard green shell nearly too big for my small hands, when I looked up. Around me, leaf shadows stirred gently as before. Above, the branches seemed undisturbed, but beside me, Hinton had stood up strangely straight, his half-filled sack swinging from his sudden rise, and beside him, Adna reaching to still it, both my siblings turning to find our mother. She was a few trees away, staring behind her across the field toward the closest windbreak. The farther glints of roofs marking the start of town, the 2 steeples spiked white against the sky's low edge gone strangely dark, less like some storm cloud coming than a strip of night that had simply refused to leave, now bent on returning. We watched it widen, the darkness climbing off the horizon over the steeple's tips, the quickness with which it filled the sky catching my breath. Its sound by then had swelled past anything like wind, become something more akin to thunder, a ceaseless rolling clap that kept on coming, loud enough to clear all else out of my ears by the time I realized it was birds. Passenger pigeons. A flock so huge it blackened the sky, blocked the sun, cast the land below into a sudden dusk sweeping fast across the field toward us. Around me I could feel the others fleeing, my brother and sister running for the cover of the thicker canopy, my mother turning as if to follow, then seeing me and pausing. By then, she'd learned to keep me separate from my siblings, to place herself between me and their playing, had come to know the way that sudden shifts in my surroundings could set me off, and in the sweeping shadow of the onrushing birds, her face betrayed her worry, but I was calm. Beneath the bird storm, I stood completely still, my 2 fists gripping 2 walnut husks, my face turned up, the roiling blast blowing away all other movement, blotting out all other sounds, encasing me. The beauty of those flashing feathers, slate blue and copper, snippets of green, streaks of tarnished silver, the movement of the flock surging, swooping, swerving, so that the sky itself appeared to lift and dip. I do not know how long it lasted, only recall the overwhelming peace, the blur of birds above, the sense their passing would never end, and then the falter, a snag in the flow, and out of the flock the first one falling, another. Some were flapping, some plummeting, some careening wildly out of the rest, the sound even louder, nearly enough to smother the shots. They had come running by the scores, townsfolk clamoring over fences, leaping off carts, women with dress fronts wet from washing, men calling back at wives to bring their guns. Already nearly 100 were following the flock, firing upward with pistols in both hands, reloading muskets on the run, flinging nets into the air or climbing roofs to hack with scythes and rakes, the rest just grabbing whatever was at hand and hurling it into the birds. My own siblings were throwing walnuts, flinging the rock-hard husks, and stooping and throwing the heavy shells again, breaking the slate-blue wings, snapping the copper-colored necks, bringing down body after flailing body to lie whapping at the ground. Then I was throwing too, whipping the stone-heavy nuts hard as I could at my sister and brother. They were a few years older, Hinton 7 or 8, Adna nearer 10, and on their faces there was a second of stunned shock, quickly replaced by fear. Their frantic screams, the quaking of our mother's voice, Cy, shouting my name, Cy, as she came running. To me, to them, I have no memory. Nothing between them then and when, a few breaths later, or half an hour, or half a day, I must have at last come back to the world. A flock that vast might have taken all afternoon to pass over the trees, out of hearing and sight, to finally leave me, a boy of maybe 4, sitting in the fallen leaves amid the bodies of fallen birds beneath a canopy turned white, branches pale as the grass beneath, as if it all had been dusted in ash. I took in my own white legs, felt the coating on my arms, in my caked hair, smeared face, and knew that it was scat, and it was comforting to my eyes, my mind, as if the frenzy of everything always around me had been subdued. I'll stop there.
Wow. Thank you, Josh. Incredible. Jason Roberts is the author of A Sense of the World, How a Blind Man Became History's Greatest Traveler, a National Book Critics Circle finalist, as well as his most recent book, Every Living Thing, The Great and Deadly Race to Know All Life, which last year won the PEN America Award for Science Writing, as well as the Pulitzer Prize for Biography. Jason and I, very proud of him. Jason and I have been friends for decades now, and I didn't know this. Jason played guitar in a Huey Lewis and the News music video. Yes, it's true. You've learned this here. And in the final cut, he's on screen for exactly 1 strum. Here's Jason.
Thank you. And yes, I won't say which music video that is, but yes, I was cast as a rock star-y kind of person. It was a very long time ago. One of the strange things is that real stories sometimes feel like less real than fictional stories, and that's because they don't have those moments that can tie things together, that combine your insight. And it ends up being like, you're building a brick wall without mortar. There aren't those things that really convince you of the reality and make things come to life. So the challenge is speaking closer into the microphone. See, like I said, I used to be a rock star type. And so what I want to do is show you how research I tried to find the mortar that I could place between the bricks of the hard facts. And I'm going to read basically the final days, the final hour of one of the main characters in my book. He's the Count de Buffon. And my book is a dual biography of two dueling biologists, basically, in the 1700s, who had different approaches on how to catalog and approach the entire world. One of them, everyone knows, is named Carl Linnaeus. The other one has been forgotten. His name was the Count de Buffon. And so it's always fascinating that when you write a death scene, it needs to be something that other than histrionic, and it needs not to be, you can't be sad, because you know what, whoever died, they died a long time ago. And so what you need to what I found to come across were some surprises. And one of the things that I felt I needed to do, and this surprised me actually, was I introduced a character at the very end of his life, who actually was a very important character in his life, but it worked for me to introduce her at this particular point. And maybe when I read it, you might be able to agree. But you'll see how I found some details and basically just stuck them into the mix there. After 47 years of clockwork scheduling, Buffon's springtime return to Paris seemed as predictable as the arrival of the season itself. But in early 1788, the staff of the Garden received an unprecedented notice. The intendant had broken routine, wrapping up his affairs and preparing the transfer of his household far sooner than earlier. It was still winter when a welcoming party of demonstrators, gardeners, and assorted jardinistes assembled in the garden's esplanade, watching an unfamiliar carriage pass through the gates and halt before the Cabinet du Roi. Why was the Count not arriving in his usual style, in his personal coach? That question faded at the sight of the man who emerged and stepped down haltingly under an assistant's hovering care. Buffon was 81 years old. Advanced kidney stones, I'm not going to pronounce the word, compelled him to walk with a deliberate gait, his customary composure occasionally broken by a wince. The carriage had been borrowed in the hopes that its more robust suspension would better shield him from the jarring of ruts and potholes. The condition, Buffon knew, was in its terminal phase. Unable to be removed by surgery, the kidney stones had accumulated to the point in which the kidneys themselves were beginning to shut down. The pain dominated every waking hour, and there were far too many waking hours. Sleep had abandoned him for the last 3 years of his life, his grandnephew would later recount, and yet the uselessness of remedies did not seem to surprise or irritate him. "What kindness, you have come to watch me die," Buffon said a few days later, grasping the hands of a woman arriving at his bedroom. What a spectacle for a sensitive soul. It was a morbid jest, and one that no longer unnerved the visitor. Buffon had been welcoming her in this fashion for several mornings now, as if she hadn't already spent the previous day sitting quietly by his side. She was Suzanne Curchod Necker, an elegant 51-year-old who moved in the highest circles of Parisian society. Her husband, the former director general of the former treasury, was a wealthy banker. She and Buffon had loved each other for more than 15 years. Theirs was what the French call an amitié amoureuse, an intimacy that is non-sexual but nonetheless passionate, conducted in plain sight and with the tolerance of significant others. Quote, "I love you and I will love you all my life," he'd written in one of the stream of letters they exchanged. "I love and respect you beyond all that I love." The words were well chosen. Respect, not ardency, had won her affection. The founder and formal center of Paris's most prestigious literary salons, Madame Necker had little time for those admirers who praised only her beauty and social graces, while failing to acknowledge her keen, far-ranging intelligence. This had never been the case with Buffon. The great man cultivated her acquaintance with a refreshing lack of condescension, treating her not as an object of flirtation, but as an intellect fully capable of sparring with his own. He sent Necker drafts of his own work to submit to her judgment, asking at the same time that she may be indulgent and frank with him. Their relationship was conducted entirely in the open. Her husband, Jacques, and Buffon often corresponded about our Suzanne, but it was indisputably one of chaste intimacy. Here we go. It is clear that Buffon saw her not only as an equal, but in many respects as a superior. Quote, but for the union of souls, it is not necessary that they be both upon the same level, and I can flatter myself that mine will never raise itself as high as yours, he said in the letter. I think to sometimes, because I wish it, because you are my model, because I love and respect you more than I've ever loved anyone. The feelings were reciprocated. When I see him, she wrote of Buffon, my heart deceives me in two ways contrary to each other. I believe I am admiring him for the first time, and I think that I have loved him all my life. I feel myself dying, Buffon said. You are still a charmer to me, when every other charm has gone from me. She remained by his bedside for 5 more days, until the morning when he surprised everyone by asking them to leave. He wished to make one last grand tour of the garden in as solitary a fashion as possible. On an April afternoon, quote, at a time when a warmer sun was gilding the new shoots, Necker and other friends retreated to a distance. We could see an old man, she wrote, supported by 2 servants, wrapped in warm furs, walking for a moment in the alley trees crossing the garden. The furs had been a gift from Catherine the Great of Russia. Buffon was not a religious man, but he said, when I become dangerously ill and feel my end approaching, I will not hesitate to send for the sacraments. One owes it to the public cult, he said. He believed that a family priest was at his side during the evening of April 14th, but he was hallucinating. It was Madame Necker who heard his last confession. Dear Ignatius, he said to the imagined fellow, you have known me for more than 40 years. You knew what my behavior has always been. I declare that I die in the religion in which I was born. He drank 3 teaspoons of Alicante wine, closed his eyes, and died at 40 minutes past midnight. Thank you.
Yes, I turned it on.
Okay,
Yours is on.
we got them on.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to toss out some questions. Then my dearest hope is this will turn into a conversation, because pretty extraordinary writers, and thank you again for those amazing readings. So different, so rich, so such amazing acts of empathy, all of them. Let's start with you, Jason. Get ready. Get ready. So, for nonfiction writers, we often approach research as content-oriented. We're gathering stuff to put in a book, content to put into the things that we're going to, enrich in our book. Do you have research discoveries that influence the structure of your book instead? Did everybody hear that question? Okay, got it.
Okay, yeah, so I am hot, right? You can hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Actually, I don't think it's on. There we go.
There we go. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so the question was, we think of research as being finding things that you put in a book, but what's the kind of research that actually changes the structure of a book itself? And when can you be listening to yourself and your editor and your agent or whatever, and understand that maybe what you've learned is changing the nature of the book? I sometimes say, sometimes kind of irreverently, but you can't actually believe that your book is well underway until it no longer resembles the book proposal. And in my case, it's interesting because this is this book started that it's the tale of two botanists, but originally it was a very straightforward biography of Carl Linnaeus and his students who went out into the world to gather specimens. He called them apostles. He was a little bit full of himself, so he had like 18 apostles who went out into the world, and only half of them came back. And I thought, wow, this will be totally fascinating. It'll be absolutely wonderful. And that was the concept that I sold originally. But then I started researching it. And not only did only half of them come back, but most of them, when they did arrive, they barely returned alive. And they didn't really have much information. And actually, Linnaeus was mad at them and and would literally like steal some of their specimens and change the names of things. And so it ended up kind of being nasty. And but so what I thought would be this great cultural sweep ended up being just one chapter in my book. But at the same time, when I started to research this, originally Buffon was, as he was in so many other biographies of Linnaeus for the past 200 years, comic relief. Linnaeus hated Buffon, and one of the reasons we know that is that he named this little spindly, slimy weed after him. It's the only thing that he named after him. But he wasn't able to. They didn't interact. They never met, and but he basically did everything that he could to destroy Buffon's reputation, and eventually that worked. There were very, disciple type people that completed my sentence for me. Yes. So anyway.
So Jason, how
Yeah,
did it change
okay.
the structure of your book?
Okay. So I had to stop and say, okay, well, I'm going to make this a book about these two people, one who's obscure and one is well known. And I eventually had to hoist them up to equal ground. And then I had to find, well, how can I possibly do that if they never meet? And I realized that they were exact contemporaries. They were born within a few years of each other. So even though they didn't meet, and even though they were in different countries, I was able to basically start telling their stories side by side because they were living through the same period of time. So that was the thing that research worked for me. Thank you, the end.
Well, and Jason, just to follow up, the scene that you read clearly showed that you had enormous, rich material to deal with, to work with, where you didn't have it with the apostles for LaBouffe. So that made a big difference. You could make it work.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, when I found that Suzanne Necker had this first-person account that he was saying to her, "Oh, you've come to watch me die. How nice of you." I thought, well, that's really incredible and that's vivid and wonderful. And like I said, they'd loved each other for 15 years. And I could have woven their correspondence through the book, so on and so forth, and I experimented with that. But then I realized that how she really works as a presence and not just someone who's writing these letters was when she was watching him die and holding his hand. And so I thought, why don't I surprise the reader by introducing this important character and understanding that, wait, he actually had this rich emotional life that was happening, and this person shows up and is holding his hand as he dies. And so I thought I'd manipulate it emotionally more in that way than in the regular way that one does. So, yes.
Wonderful. Josh, next to you, if I may. So were there particular steps you took to approach the culturally sensitive aspects of your book, especially the role of Native American tribes in the story?
Yeah. Is that better? Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that the book would bring me that deeply into that world, but it became pretty quickly apparent that. Is this still going? Okay. Became pretty quickly apparent. And, I had done a lot of book research in historical libraries and anthropologist accounts. There wasn't much about the Nisenan or really about the Californian tribes in general until post Gold Rush. But still, stuff that was written in the 1870s was pretty applicable in many ways, although there had been a genocide. And I mean, we should just acknowledge, the Nisenan were about, numbers range from 7 to 12,000 before the Gold Rush. Within 2 decades, they were down into under 100. Wow. So, and it was very much it fits all of the demands of the word genocide. So I think it's important that we acknowledge it. But it became, as I was doing the book research, it became clear to me that I really needed to make sure to talk to the remaining Nisenan that are still around. And in Nevada City, we have a strong and active tribal community there, although it's small. And so I wound up kind of checking in with the tribal representative there from the beginning. And we spent 5-6 years where I would just a couple times a year meet with her and go over what I was finding. And sometimes she would be bringing up what she was going on stories that had been passed down through generations. And so there was a lot that she also was grasping for. And it was a process of really kind of together trying to find not just the book research, but again with linguistics, with talking with the last few people who have a grasp of Nisenan language and the Maidu languages and various stuff like that. And I think the most important thing that came out of that in talking with Huswe, which is the organization there, was a kind of gray zone and an understanding of a flexibility and an increased kind of awareness of just the complex humanity of these tribes that couldn't be compressed into what you'd find in anthropological research. And a lot of that was because there would be gray areas where we'd say, well, was this something that the Nisenan were doing, or was this something the Mountain Maidu were doing? And Shelley, the tribal representative, and I would talk about it in the way, just like in any family, if the Mountain Maidu are your next tribe over, you're going to incorporate aspects of their traditions into your life. And so in a way, it became hugely important to me to just have a more, an ever increasingly nuanced and complex understanding of them as families, as individuals, and not necessarily as, well, this is how this tribe does it specifically, and everything has to be exactly the same within that village and this village next to it.
What strikes me is how long and how deep that relationship. Did you just tell us 5 to 7 years?
Yeah.
That's astonishing. And Jason, your book took at least 10 years, really.
It's hard to answer that question because I've been writing 2 books over the past 15 years, and switching from one to the other with various vagaries of the publishing world and so on and so forth.
So
and
I
not
guess
only that, but particularly in nonfiction, is that you plant a few rows in your vineyard. You don't know if they're going to come through. So I also have like 4 or 5 other ideas that I think will get up. And so to get down to the point, how long did it take me to write this book? That's really hard to separate.
Well, and again, the acts of empathy that it takes to write these astonishing books takes time. And that leads me directly to Gene. And full disclosure, Gene, I was involved with his book, Gene's book, and really honored. So I have a pretty close view of your process of this book. But it took you a long time to put together the research to bring this together. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, it was something, the shipwreck was widely reported in the media, but you went so far beyond. Tell us about your research process and how long it took you.
Yeah, this incident was widely covered at the time. I don't know if anybody here remembers. There was a PBS, a really good piece on PBS about it. At that time, what was going on over there was very much even in US news, which is hard to imagine. And this shipwreck was something that really stood out because, one thing I was able to find out, the last time that the Coast Guard, the Hellenic Coast Guard is responsible for tracking the deaths and giving everybody and all the families accurate information. The last press release they had said 40 people had drowned. And when I went, and I knew, and they probably knew, that was an incredibly vague number. If you ever read in the newspaper, these are ongoing incidents, and you'll read, around 125 people drowned off Malta, around 75 people. if you think about it, this is really a very painful fact that there is so much, it's all so vague. And I think I was so impacted by this as a reporter. You know, I was there that day. I was there. I was on the cliffs. I looked at the binoculars. I saw the sea of life jackets. Then I was down in the little village where the rescue was taking place and people were being brought. I had no idea what had happened. Really. You don't really know. And if you look at my own reporting, you'll see that I used the numbers of the Coast Guard, which were accurate at the time, so I couldn't get in trouble, right? It was the official account. But so much was not known. You don't know how many are missing. And so one of my driving things was, this was my fantasy. Supposedly, I was going to somehow get almost every name of whoever got on this boat. This is so ridiculous. There is no tracking. These are smugglers. There is no manifest. So when an airplane goes down or a cruise liner, God forbid, and they don't really, the information of who was on that boat, where they were from, and then eventually you would know, well, this many people died, so many people are missing. You could even determine who was missing. And there's something very basic about having this information for closure. This is the most basic respect that we can give our fellow humans. So I guess there's so much I can say about my research, but I was obviously driven with this passion, coming from my own sense of limitation as a journalist. And what can you do as a journalist in the face of one of the hugest problems of our time? You really can't do that much, right? But you can try and tell a story really well. And that's all, it's like a small offering. And this led me to just keep going and going. And I guess I mentioned this when I did my reading, but finding people from that day was really hard. And Julie saw me going through that process. One guy, a Syrian psychologist, he was the gift that kept on giving because he weighed 480 pounds. So everybody remembered him. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew where he was from. Nobody knew anything about him, but they would say, oh, I do remember this one guy. And then I started realizing he was in he would pop up in documentaries and in photographs. So I saw him, but how do you find him? None of the journalists actually, and this does not speak that well of some of my colleagues, had written down his name. Finally, I found one who had written at least a name. I asked every journalist, every NGO, nobody had any idea. Finally, I just wrote a short piece on Medium, which was sort of the Substack of that moment, had it translated into Arabic, and then had a Syrian friend post it on Arabic language Facebook in Germany and other countries. And I finally found him. And I went through various processes like that with different people, and it required going. He had made it to Germany after he survived this, and I went in 2019 and spent several days doing these interviews, and you think you have enough, and then you get home and start writing. And after a couple years and COVID, it was getting really thin, and I was very worried that I was embellishing, because here I am, a journalist wanting to tell a good story, and this is one of the biggest pitfalls. I did not want to be embellishing, and so that's why research is your friend. When you have enough material in your soul, that allows you to write simple, good prose and believe in it.
It's really helpful. Jean, yay. Jean also managed to track down smugglers, which is quite an astonishing feat, but that's for another time. Hector, you had a very different set of challenges with Deep Down Dark, which is that you knew the miners. The whole world knew the 33 miners. You did hundreds of hours of interviews with these Chilean miners. How in the world did you then turn that raw material into such a gripping narrative?
Well, because I wanted to write a novel. And I saw their story as a novel. And I'm very fortunate well, maybe stubborn is more the right word to describe it, because, I mean, I've been writing for 30 years, and every time I've written a book of nonfiction, it's right after publishing a novel. And so with that book, Deep Down Dark, I had just published my novel, The Barbarian Nurseries. And that novel taught me some really important lessons just about books. The most important one was that when you write about someone, whether they're fictional or nonfiction, a real person or a fictional character, you have to really respect the integrity of the full person, right? Their flaws, their good qualities, their wholeness, right? I learned this because my novel, The Barbarian Nurseries, was initially rejected by every publisher in New York and Minnesota and North Carolina, everywhere. And it was rejected because it was a really bad novel. It was a bad novel about a social issue, about the undocumented, and I wrote it, my agent then, Ginger Barber, who I met accidentally here in when it was called, well, something else. She told me, Hector, this is a polemic. And she was right. I saw later that I needed to really write about this person, my protagonist in that novel, as a real person. That she wasn't just an issue. And the family she worked for wasn't just her foil. They had to be real people. And it helped that after I wrote the original failed draft of that novel, I had kids. And so I could write a novel about a family, which that novel is, from the point of view of someone who actually raised children. Yeah? And so I applied that principle to this miner's book, which is, you're not just a victim of this tragedy. You're not just a survivor of this event broadcast on CNN around the world, right? You're not just a national hero. You are one, You're Mario Sepulveda, tell me your story. And so I approached my first questions weren't about the trauma. It wasn't the questions that all the bad journalists were asking them, like, what was it like down there? It was dark, Did you eat each other? Did you have sex together? And they were deeply offended by all of that. My first question was, why did you become a miner? Tell me about, and well, my father was a miner. Oh, tell me what it was like to grow up in a mining family. Well, senor, we used to play by the entrance to the mine when I was a kid, and I would make a little toy mine when I was a kid, and in that vein, and I realized that what I had in that book was a love story. It was a story about 33 men who went into that foul place to work, the same reason that those migrants got on that boat, right? Because they loved their families, they loved their communities. Yeah. They wanted to give something to it was a path of social mobility for them. Many of them had houses, extra houses they had owned. Some of them had 2 houses because they had a mistress, It was like this, and they had sent their kids to college. And then in the mine itself, there was this incredibly powerful brotherhood among these 33 men, which as they began to die of starvation, took on these religious overtones. And so what happened eventually with that book was I felt a novel coming alive, around me. The themes of a novel, of love, the setting, the complexity. All of us here have described different settings, right? Getting to know the Sierra Nevadas, the indigenous people, getting to know this history, getting to know, and you do, and part of the great, you've read some dramatic passages, but you reconstruct the lives of these of these men and women and children before they get on the ship, right? And so that having this respect for the complete person, and then doing the work in an interview, as many of you know, our books are very often artifacts of this human interaction that we had, where we spent time listening to people, and that listening changed us. And it gave something back to those people, right? You were only able to include, and I know this because I had this, a fraction of what you learned, right? Oh, I'm sorry. You were only able to include a fraction of what you learned. But apart from this incredible book you wrote, you also gave something back to the lives of the people you listened to, right? And our books are artifacts of that. And so, so all of that is stuff that I think writing novels really helped me to see that in nonfiction.
I've got a question for both of you, and that is that I seem to recall, Hector, that you were under a certain degree of time pressure to write the book.
With the Miners book, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Jean, your book, it started out as journalism. And so just the idea of how do you make the transition from I'm not doing journalism anymore, but I'm writing a book, because you know what? People don't need a thicker version of the newspaper. And how you're able to do that, how you did it in such a short time frame, and how you made use of your time, and how you managed to keep it relevant even when it was no longer a news story.
Well, I think that, part of it to me, I remember when I made the pitch for my book, I went to all these New York houses. And at the last one at FSG, my editor asked me, Hector, is this going to be a Miners book or is it going to be a Hector Tobar book? Provocative question. And I knew what the right answer was. The right answer was, and I thinking of my Guatemalan mother, I tried to answer as humbly as possible. I said, I believe that this is a book that's going to allow me to further practice my craft as a storyteller and to tell a story that changes the craft in some way, right? In other words, it's going to be a Hector Tobar book. So in this frantic time period, I approached it as I am creating a work of art. Where is the art? What do I have to do to find the art? I have this great moment. Many times I worked on a hypothesis model. It's like, okay, I have 3 or 4 people telling me something that happened here, but they're not telling me the full story. I hypothesize that there's something going on there between these two guys, and then I would approach it, and oftentimes I would find out I was wrong or I was right. And so, but it was thinking in a way, rushing to sort of, I was under a lot of pressure because these crazy 33 guys were breaking apart as a unit. And part of them wanted to sell their stories to other people. And I had the exclusive rights, for the time until they fell apart. And I managed to get my book done in time. But it was just wanting to sort of assert, and I think you've done the same thing, Jean. You've asserted an artistic and human vision on this story. It's not just a recounting, right, of the story. It's a vision of this larger story as an epic, as a human epic that is international, that shows the way in which our countries are connected, right? The connectedness of our countries. Yes.
Well, one reason that Hector is speaking so kindly of my book is that he early on blurbed it for me. And I want to mention that because we're among writers and how it can be a total pain, but how much that meant to me, how helpful that was to me. So thank you, but he has read my book. But to answer your question, Jason, I just had to learn not to be a journalist. It was really scary. I was scared many times. I came here very early on and didn't have any shape even for the proposal yet, but I sort of was at least putting myself in the flow of narrative nonfiction writers. And then I had a writing group and with Julie Seiler and others who had written many books, and that was helpful. I also, during COVID, started writing every day on Zoom in a group we called it Surveillance Writers. And so we would just sign on and write and then sometimes read out loud or talk a little bit about the work. To my great benefit, they were all fiction writers, except for me. And so I would try and, I'd read something out loud and they're all just saying, no, much more detail, longer, they would say. So I'm somebody who knows how to write a New York Times piece in 700 words. It's like a jewel, right? But this is the opposite of what you need. So I just had to keep trying and certain things would work, and I just kind of learned as I went along, I have to say. So for all of you working on first books, it is possible. And I did have enough experience as a journalist under my feet and as a researcher that that gave me enough structure to move forward.
Can I just follow on that really quickly? I'm really curious because it's great that you took up the burden of making it a real narrative, of making it novelistic. Hector, you had 33 main characters, and you had as many as you could scoop out of the sea. So how did you differentiate them? How did you get the reader be able to follow something?
Well, I was very lucky in that I had one particular guy, Mario Sepulveda, who wasn't like formally in charge that day when they were trapped. But he became like the unofficial leader because he was this incredibly charismatic person. And it turned out that he had all these incredible emotional ups and downs. Half the miners loved him, half the miners hated him afterwards. And it turned out that he was bipolar and he wasn't taking his medicine when he was trapped. And I like to tell people that he wasn't just one Shakespearean character. He was all of them. He'd be Falstaff and be telling jokes, and he'd be Hamlet and we're doomed, we're going to die here. So I think that character really was the thing that helped me organize the narrative was, I have a scene. This is going to move the story forward. It centers around this character, what they want. It centers around this tension between these two characters. And so, I had 33 guys. I interviewed all 33 of them. But there's one guy who might be more representative. So there was a bunch of young guys. I had one young guy. There was a bunch of guys who were more family-oriented. I had one guy who was really family-oriented. And then I had the guys from the South. So I sort of chose among this large group representatives of the larger story.
So we have time for one more question. I'm going to turn it to Josh as our thank you, our really focusing on fiction. If you hadn't seen the incredible rave review of Josh's novel that he read from, you might want to take a look at that in the New York Times. Josh, question for you. Was there research that shifted the book in significant ways in a late draft?
Yeah, there was a fair amount that did that. The book shifted a lot between draft about 5 years in and about 6 years in. And one of the big things that happened was my grappling with this character and who he was and how his mind worked, because I didn't read from the opening book, but it's fairly violent. And we're introduced to him through violence, and to understand him and and to empathize with him, and I knew I was giving myself a great challenge with the reader. And so I had shied away from wanting to categorize him and wanting to categorize what was going on with him psychologically. And I realized that in some ways that was a cop-out, and I was afraid to do that. I was afraid to get into really understanding him in the way that I had to. And so I did a lot of research into neurodivergence, into the autism spectrum, and that wound up being like 200 pages in the book. Wow. Essentially, it wound up being taking us through his childhood and all the way through who he became and how he became that. And so it had a huge impact on the novel. And I think there's a lesson in that. Jean had mentioned how you were scared kind of going to this, and I was very scared writing this book at different points. And I think research is your friend when you're afraid. I felt like I knew that I could approach this, whether it's aspects of neurodivergence, whether it's aspects of the Native American issues. I could approach it with a good heart. I could approach it as well-intentioned as I could. But the other aspect of the responsibility was to just do the most accurate and best job that I could, right? And that entailed just doing so much research that I felt like there wasn't any more that I could do to get at what was as true as I could get. So for everybody out there, the research can feel daunting, but that's where I would go when I was scared. I would go into kind of finding that research to bolster it.
I think there's such an important emotional truth there. Research is your friend when you're afraid, and aren't we all afraid a lot of the times as writers. I feel that way. I think most of us, if we're being honest, feel that way. Hector, you said something wonderful at the beginning, too. Research as a stimulus for the imagination. Because you don't know what you're going to find. You don't know you're going to find that.
It is a
yes.
stimulus for imagination, but it is also an all-you-can-eat buffet. And yeah, I've talked about research rapture in the past, but that's the thing, is that you go into it. You have to be looking to find the things you don't know that you're going to find, but when you find them, you recognize that, yes, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you are going to overburden the book with all of your research, and it will come groaning to a complete stop.
And on that note, research buffet. Anyways, thank you so much. I wanted to point out their books are available in the bookstore. They're amazing books. Go get them. They'll sign them.